Everyone, thank you so much for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. We had some people moving around there at the end, and I wanted to give everybody a chance to be comfortable. I am so very grateful for each of you who's taken time to come out here this evening, and I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Heather Ottone. I'm the James T. Bialek Associate Curator of Native American and Non-Western Art. It has been my ambition since coming to the museum to develop more programming that is sensitive to the Native community, for which our collection is quite representative. And so this is really the first time that I've been able to kind of bring an idea together. I'm hoping that it won't be the last. My hope is that in the forthcoming Novembers, which are the National Native American Heritage Month, that we'll always have at least one event that brings an important voice in the art community, especially when it's related to the art in our collection, which we have such a fantastic collection. I don't really think that's going to be the challenge. And having something for our OU community and the Norman community at large that engages in thoughtful and provocative conversation. I would like to ask all of you to take a moment to make sure that your cell phones are silenced. We are recording tonight's events, and so if for some reason, and we all have family and emergencies happen, if you need to take a call, would you please step out the hallway and into the gallery so that your conversation doesn't our recording. And then I'd also just like to take a moment to Kathleen Thompson. She's running our tech booth and helped us with our tech run earlier today. I'd also like to acknowledge Mark White, who is our museum director, for whom I appreciate the support he continues to give me. Tonight's event is also co-sponsored by the Crossroads Film Festival and Film and Media Studies, and I'd like to extend my appreciation to Joshua Nelson and Dr. Andrew Horton, who are here in the audience with us tonight. Thank you both for coming. And then I'd also like to express my appreciation to Dr. Amanda Cobb and the Native American Studies Program, also a co-sponsor of tonight's events. Dr. Cobb couldn't be here with us, but it doesn't reduce my gratitude to her. So as I mentioned, tonight's events are something that I hope we'll be able to continue, and it's going to be very special, and I'm thankful again for each of you making the time. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, Hanska Luger, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, Lakota, Austrian, and Norwegian. We had a Scandinavian moment. He was born in 1979 in North Dakota on the Standing Rock Reservation. He was raised in between the urban spaces of Phoenix and the rural spaces of North Dakota. Graduated with honors from the Institute of American 2011 with a BFA focused on studio ceramics. He continues in Mexico with his family, and his art is represented by Blue Rain Gallery. Has been working to develop art that considers the relationship between indigenous and the knowledge and misknowledge that circulates within about Native America. Through multiple series, Cannupa has been playing and investigating the relationship. The museum has benefited from the continued collecting practices of our beloved donor, James T. Bialek, who has collected 4 works for our collection made by Cannupa. In anticipation of tonight's events, we've installed one titled Stereotype, the Luger, Sandy Bell Gallery right outside the auditorium. While this film has been screened in other venues, we're very fortunate to be able to have this artist, the film, and the art.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. I am Cannupa Hanska Luger, and I would like to, let's see here, play with this computer for a moment. I told them that it was okay, that people are used to watching people face screens and mess with their tech. So not this long, though, huh? Okay. So to give you a little bit of context about the film that we're going to watch tonight, I wanted to start off by displaying with you I'm going to show you a short film about the project that inspired the making of this. I like to consider it an art project more than a film, because it's kind of a documentary, kind of not. But let me start off by showing you this, and then I will go in more detail. Oh, it is. You're right. We practiced this. This is all part of it, actually. Here we go.
Widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Stereotype is simple and does not require facts or experience, but just has to be believed in. Native American is an umbrella term for the indigenous population. The term, being so broad, has allowed many external source interpretations, psychologists to Hollywood directors. The entertainment industry has helped to develop and reinforce these stereotypes. Greatest fear is that these ideas become the icon and the future generations pull from these facsimiles. Stereotypes surround every person on the planet as we compartmentalize identity to the lowest common. Society is trained in this form of dissection. Adopting a culture without context or understanding drags the stories and histories through the mud, bastardizing a sacred history for the kitsch aspect of an object. Manufactured with the intent of consumption to be used, products create a mentality of disrespect. Not honor the aesthetic, they steal and consume. Accurate as possible, first one must. Stereotypes are abundant for Native peoples. Bind the Native American stereotypes to objects solidifies them. The concept is that these stereotypes are now bound to something physical, and the physical world can now act upon it. It can be. All of the pieces created represent misconceptions of the Native American. On their own, may be misinterpreted to read. As a response to these stereotypes, 4 pieces were built: autumn, winter, spring, and summer. The pieces are titled after the 4 seasons to represent time, a dimension that is in constant flux and binds them to the moment of now. They also represent the elements: earth, fire, wind, and water. These elements can be found in every living being. Like every living being, each of these is flawed. These flaws are proof of life, because only the moment of creation is perfect. Beyond that, all things exist in a state. How one adapts is how one survives, and how one survives is how one truly lives. Autumn, winter, spring, and summer exist as an honest description of Native people. They're described, the further from the truth they become.
So that body of work is what really kind of inspired the next film that we're about to watch. After completing that film, I was put into this somewhat awkward position of being a bottleneck to the stereotype issue, in which I am but a single filter and cannot encompass that whole concept. So I started working on a film with a friend of mine who actually filmed that short, named Dylan McLaughlin, and my wife, Ginger Dunnell. She did the music, and he did the film work, and the concept was created by me, and then we worked collaboratively to come up with a film that we are about to show you this evening. And after the film completes, we'll have a discussion. So thank you very much for coming. And
Of the Cannupa Sioux tribe. We don't like the name Sioux. French call the Sioux that by because he snuck through the grass like a snake. Like to be called Dakotas.
As a culture, we've become pretty lazy. Labeling have this one definition of understanding. Word Native American is this really simple, lazy of over 500 different people with different languages, beliefs, and different ties to land and being human.
Go back to my res, and I have a feeling it's like any res. They say Indian, you know. When I went to college, then all the professors and students are saying Native American, and people addressing me say Native American. Then I go back home to my reservation and I say Native American, and everyone's looking at me like, what the f are you talking about? I'm like, oh my God, this is so confusing. And then people back home are like, oh yeah, she's left the reservation and got an education. I think she's better than us, and saying Native American. But then if I say Indian to people off the reservation, then they're like, isn't that like a bad term to say?
For me, Native American just means that our society and the way that we live existed before the United States. I don't mind the term Native American. Indian kind of been tossed by the wayside in the last 10 or 12 years. I also like indigenous, because indigenous is a broad term. It could be indigenous of Europe, indigenous people of the Soviet Union, indigenous people of North America. I grew up with the word Indian, though. It's just a way for people to describe something, to get a handle on it.
I don't think anybody can define what Native American is. Much to different people, eras, you know. Positive sometimes, it was a negative. Definitely a Western term. It's kind of strange.
The idea of an all-encompassing Native American umbrella, it just sort of strips away the diversity and the uniqueness of each knowledge, where everybody comes from.
Think about the diversity of Indian country. Over 500 and 67 tribes, and each of our tribes having their own language and their own culture and their own art and design. And the only things that you really see in the stores are that kind of like narrow strip of quote-unquote plains Indian things. It's all drawing in on that same stereotypical aesthetic, and the harm of that is that it erases the complete diversity of our communities, and it erases all of our contemporary existence, and then it collapses even the diversity of the plains down into this like very constricted handful of stereotypes that represents their diverse cultures and communities.
Well, Native American has kind of a dual life for me. It's someone else's word for my experience, struggling to define my experience in one phrase. It's a big task, and it can never accomplish what it's trying to do. People to really understand my experience. How do you refer to yourself as what?
I don't think any of these phrases are good descriptors of who you've been or who we are now. I don't think that they're entirely correct.
Definitely strength in numbers, and I appreciate there are terms that refer to us idea of what do we call ourselves and like, is there power in that? The power all comes from us. I don't think that we need to get rid of any of these terms really, but I do think that we need to figure out what that means to us.
Just think a little bit, just what are we? Just what is an Indian? I know there's many definitions for an Indian as there is stars in the sky, I guess. A few examples of those, a definition we know of the Bureau of Indian Affairs is if you're 1 quarter more can be proven ancestry, you're an Indian. Everybody knows that in the movie, depicted as being savage, killing red men. And there are many, many more definitions of just what an Indian is. An Indian is a drunk, a lazy, no good for nothing. But some of the things that I think that this society has failed to recognize is the contributions that the Indian people have made to not only the United States, but to the world. I know in the past, and it has been probably difficult at times, associated as an Indian. But hopefully these days are gone. These days are gone now, I hope forever. But it's going to have to take a responsibility on the part of the younger generation to make known that I am an Indian. I am proud of it. We have made great contributions to the world.
Oh, Ruben.
Yes.
People.
Well, no, I do. I'm interested in painting, and I guess it just comes naturally. I never had no experience. After the war, I was stationed in Germany. There I took lessons from some of the German painters. I learned a lot from the German painters because I was doing a lot of things wrong. I used to paint nothing but wildlife, mostly wildlife sceneries and things like that. That artists at the Marshall College asked one to see me and bring them up to me. I think a picture of a pheasant and a deer and a pictures are good, but you shouldn't paint like that anymore. Well, I said, I have to because I make a living at it. Well, you know, he says, you're an Indian. Make Indian paintings, he said, you're nothing but Indian culture, being that you're an Indian, he said. Before that, I could never sell an Indian painting. Nobody would ever buy a. Now everything is Indian. I can make Indian paintings and sell them. That's all I do is all the Indian sceneries are buffalo and things like that. The sacred buffalo that you would go there. I will have that done by. Here's one that some young guy asked for this, so I agreed.
Young guy.
Young fellow wants that, yeah. So I hardly keep up with that order. Some of the paintings that my son how the Indian people live. Here's an Indian looking into horizon. Skyscrapers in the back.
Top of this painting starts from where the white people came in. White people first came over in the ship. That shows the scene. How later on came. Buffalo knuckle represents after they killed most of all the buffalo off, then they put the That's Mount Rushmore. Before that, Black Hills used to be considered white men that represented hole in the middle represents the Indians.
I guess I have to think back when I was really young. I don't know if there's like a. I'm trying to think of where is that one point? Where's that defining moment? I think it's a series of moments. Your own personal realization. What does it mean to be Native? Now, definition of what it means to be Native might possibly be different than it was even 10 years ago. Might be different than it was 20 years ago or 50 years ago. And yet, we're still, quote unquote, being Native. Or Native, what does Native mean to me? I think for me, it means a lot of things. It might mean where I live right now on a dirt road in San Carlos. It might mean raising my kids in a single wide trailer. But to someone else, it might mean going to a powwow and being at Gathering of Nations and representing their tribe, or selling fry bread on the side of the road on the way to the Grand Canyon. To someone else, it might mean enjoying a mutton sandwich with green chili. It means a lot of things to a lot of people.
I've sort of considered myself kind of lucky, I guess, to be part of something so unique and special and cool. But I don't like saying that, because the idea that natives are unique makes it seem like we're of something and something bigger. But, you know, I mean, we are, especially tribally, you know, when you say that you're from a specific tribe, that's like,
There's always kind of an internal conversation about what does it mean to be. Have that internal struggle. A lot of it has been because these images in the media only paint that sort of one-sided stereotype of this is a real Indian. A real Indian is a Plains Indian with a war bonnet and buckskin and beads. And that's something that has even been sort of picked up in a lot of our communities. Like, I know there are definitely images of folks in more contemporary times putting on those outfits to go to government meetings or to do public events or things in order to be recognized and seen as fully Native people, because they know that that's what non-Natives associate with being a real Indian. It is complicated because those instances where they needed to feel fully seen as Native people, it was in order to fight for our communities or to represent our communities. And if that's what you had to do, then that's what you had to do. But then it kind of continues the stereotype of that's what real Indians look like. Something that kind of seeps in how you view yourself as a contemporary Native person.
Now is a beaver pelt. Pelt at the time of the voyageur was probably the most sought after commodity in this country, because fashion in Europe dictated high hats were the rage, and everyone or pipe stems. Just about everyone in that time used to smoke a long pipe, and every once in a while you'd find these pipe stems. Apparently it was a dump area. This is a glass bead. Fun to collect, like I said before, because it's not so much hobby, but a real insight into what 7,000 years ago to 250 are old artifacts, and I'm sure artifacts of things that we use every day.
Found this to be most interesting project, hobby, family project for us.
I was in Cherokee, North Carolina when I was 13. We're walking around and we see a guy who's actually very obviously, you know, Cherokee guy, full-blooded. Headdress. And he has standing there on the corner and doing. He's sitting there and he has a little placard thing that says $5 for pictures or something like that. Messed up that an Indian person would actually sell their own image, this fake image, that they would see themselves as not real, that they would. Dad says to the kids now, how, say how to the Indian. Like, how, Indian? And I'm like, well, for me, even if I was like hard up, like that would be my breaking point. That'd be where I'm like, all right, you know what, random dude, like fists are coming out, like you just said how to me, like, but no, that was the whole image. He raised his hand and goes, how, you know. And I walked away feeling so hurt, not just for myself, I just felt bad for the guy, and it took a long time to figure out what bugged me about it so much, but and it ended up being that he didn't believe himself to be a stereotype, even if he was a guy that understood what it meant to be Indian, if it, all his traditions, spoke his language, what all this. Thought that the only way people would be interested in messed up, romanticized version of it. Thought that non-native people would be interested. Or it was in the 70s. We're still. What are we going to show to the world then? Yeah, we're here.
I've met people who have like no idea what about Native Americans other than teepees, Geronimo, horses. Pretty much like literally, you know, eagle. Well, there's, you know, over 500 tribes right now in the United States. A lot of them have individual languages. Also many different religious views, cultural ways of doing. All dance differently, but there's a type of gathering that happens almost like a festival, and it's oh wow, you know. Generally, you know, they dance. It's all social dance, and it's very important individual tribal ceremonies and gatherings. That is definitely not a powwow. That is what powwow circle, you know, there's definitely space for positive spirituality that you can really good thing.
I think sometimes Native people so easily get caught up in banging each other over the head about what is and isn't Indian that kind of just forget to be human. It's all about, well, I'm more Indian than you. About that. Not everybody was born and raised in the same way. What we're afraid to talk about even now is we've always been complex. The systems that talked about us didn't want to talk about the complexity. For some reason, they always wanted to talk about the ethno-purity of what it means to be Native American.
That would always happen is, you know, growing up, I had long hair. So I always was called a girl. Oh, that's a pretty little girl, you know. I'm sitting there with my brothers and I have long hair, you know, at Denny's or And, that was something that bugged me. But then if you go, my family, dances. And so when we were dressed up to perform, it became a positive thing. And everybody was like, they knew we were boys because all of a sudden they saw us as Indians.
People off the reservation would follow us in grocery stores or drugstores, and how my mother would react to it. She was really militant and combatant with people off the reservation that would do that when I was a kid. She would confront them, like, do you follow your white customers? Why are you following us? Going out in public when I was a kid would always ultimately end up in some sort of confrontation because, passive as far as putting up with that kind of shit.
Stereotypes and discrimination go hand in hand. My family, it's like sometimes you go out to eat, crappy service, or people follow you around. I'm kind of lighter skinned, so part of my family is darker, like my dad's darker, and so I definitely am on the lighter side, so I get to kind of see it outside a little bit more. And, in my own community, because I am light-skinned, oh, I thought you were white. So that, it's complex.
Know who you are from an early age. You have to be fortified against the outside world with your identity.
Living in Pittsburgh, the World Series was happening, and there was, the Atlanta Braves, and that kind of stuff. And my sister, we're 8-9 years apart, and so around 12, and we walked into the living room and the World Series, and my sister turned to my mom. She asked, why are they doing that? Is it powwow time? And my mom, who's probably one of the most educated, influential people that not just I know, but many in the community knew. And she kind of, I realized that she was about to cry because there was no way for her to explain to why people would do what was happening, and that it wasn't powwow time, and that those were not our people. American Indian movement. So for my mom to go from 20, 30 years of her life to having her own child at 3 in her living room, seeing college, I would imagine that would be sad for any parent. Our parents and grandparents have been trying to tell people, how long does it take for people, that if it offends the people, it's offensive. And if you're not from the people, who are you to say what offends them and what doesn't?
Spent some years in small Indian schools. Those days in boarding school were quite an experience to me. More or less prepared me for the high school and was drafted into the Army. Much better than the inductees I was there because spent some time in Korea as a air trooper and wanted to be airborne. Today, then majority of my people on a day-to-day basis. Other short part.
Our project began about 2 years ago, which is a Title IV ESCA project here in Portage, and it tries to answer the question of the fact that there is not much are really being used for our local school district. We feel primary need that is very important for our children and for non-Indian children learn about the history and culture of our people, the Ojibwe. One book that is used in the Head Start level is called Bonded QA. Book that talks about how this little Indian girl that goes to the Head Start program is the same as everyone else. She brushes her teeth in the morning and she eats breakfast and has a mommy and daddy like everyone else. But she is culture that is different than the other non-Indian children. She's a little has things that make up herself and her being that are different. That's called culture. So this kind of goes into that and points out to little children that to be different is not to be wrong.
The goal of the program, I believe, is to proud to be Indians. Respected what we are. Act on this problem because of the program. At an early age, realized that they are Indians, that they have successful people.
As years go by, maybe the white man can learn from the Indian textbooks. Be a way of informing the white people, so-called, to learn about the Indians. I mean, what a real Indian is, not an Indian that's running around half naked and this kind of thing, but to really inform the white society about what an Indian really is.
I grew up with being Native as just a part of who I am. The realization of when that made me an other into sort of, I don't know that really happened for a really long time, because I also went to a progressive school called the Red Schoolhouse. Went there from kindergarten to third grade to Buganagishic school. Till middle school, I was surrounded by Indians and Indian communities. The good thing is that the education in that school top notch. So when I went to the public school for middle school, when I started going, actually more advanced than most of them. But the teachers, the faculty at the public school, this middle school, thought I was a lot dumber because I came from.
White man religion belongs to them. It doesn't belong.
My name is Father Bearsheart. At St. Cornelius, first Indian priest. Part of the Battle of the Little Big Horn. I didn't learn any of these when I was in school. There was no history of any type that was taught in our schools. It was until I was about 30 years old when I went to seminary. Other people from talk about the Indian people and tell them that today we're actually losing our culture. Most of our children today can't speak their own language, and so it was well at my seminary, Berkeley, California, started to do some research among the Indian people. I didn't realize that there were so many tribes. I can speak the Dakota language. One of the first things they told us was to speak English. I didn't know a word of English, and sometimes I don't know why I got spanked. Listening to these well-educated men that have some doctorate degrees told. So this is the story of my life today. I'm a priest, but yet I'm proud of being an Indian.
I go through,
Eventually, this idea of Native America is really going to just be null and void. We have more important to worry about. The fact that water is gold. This conversation of Native and American Indian is important to have, but I also think that our youth understand that what's happening with their communities, and for us, like land erosion and loss of land, important conversation. We're the people that are going to find out. Have a greater conversation about the plastic ocean, but how much stronger would we be to have a battle that should have ended 50 years?
A living culture, any culture that's alive, that's living, that's growing, that's flourishing, and process, I think it destroys itself too. So it kind of has to destroy culture. And for the culture to grow and for people to go forward, certain things have to be.
Yes, we have to be careful as Native people.
Responsible for being supportive of preserving cultures and languages, also responsible for the attacks, responding to the attacks on our identity, popular culture and the world, the ugliness of it.
Probably that kid in the living room, why their culture is being presented. Back into that classroom of their culture, or hooping around, and they silence themselves more. Remedy that. But if those voices weren't hit, all of that, and just allowed to breathe, we would be allowing our youth to be to help our water systems, our land systems, our environment, or wherever they want to go. But I don't think there's too many other humans, youth, that our youth have to deal with, because they act as a child.
All about exposure, and it's all about getting our voices and our faces and our images and our designs and everything out there to challenge those stereotypes, because we've been so invisible for so long, and now we have a new opportunity through social media and through new media and through these other outlets that haven't always been accessible to us as Native peoples, to tell our own stories for the first time, to have our voices be the ones talking about our communities, and both the positive and the negative. But I really push for having positive representations, because only things we see are these stereotypes, and a lot of the stereotypes are very negative about the poverty and the alcoholism and the disappearing culture and these things. But there's so much vibrancy and so much joy and so much excitement that I see in my own community and my Native friends and the work that I do. And so being able to push that forward as the new representations, I think, is important, and is going to be a lifelong continuing battle. But we are really starting to make inroads, and I think those Native voices in all sort of areas throughout media, throughout business, throughout everything, to be able to have those living counter narratives, those living counter stereotypes to the things that are so ingrained in our society and are so hard to shake and to challenge.
We're in a position where we have access to sort of a loudspeaker to the world with the internet, and don't have to yell out about how pissed off we are. Because people have been doing that for a long time. How much we want to change things. And if we are going to say those things, we're going to couch our laughs and our silliness and stereotype. We're going to be a stereotype.
I hand wrote all of these, but these are all of the folks who chipped in to help us produce this film. But it goes on for quite a long time. So if we could bring up the lights, we can begin our discussions. Kathleen, can you turn on the handheld mic, please?
Testing. Oh, really loud.
Wonderful.
Tonight's event is being recorded, so if you have any comments, we'd like to ask you to allow me to bring the microphone to you so that they can be included, and then that way Cannupa doesn't have to repeat your question.
Yeah, and this film was created as a catalyst for conversation, for this opportunity. So please, anything that you're, if it evoked any sort of emotion or anything you'd like to share with the group that's here today, it would be greatly appreciated.
Loved the old original footage. Where did you get it?
That footage was actually from the Native American Video Archive, which was created in 1973, I believe. So it was filmed in the heart of the civil rights movement, and I felt like it was instead of describing what that experience was like, that footage had never been utilized. It had gone to the Smithsonian for a while and ended up at the Institute of American Indian Arts, where me and Dylan and Ginger had gone through it, 200 some tapes, and tried to clean them up. So that's where the footage came from.
Thanks for coming, man.
Thank you.
A great film. I'm not sure that I've fully worked out what I'd like to ask you, but I'll try. We were visiting earlier, and you were describing one of the things about this moment that attracted you to this footage was the chance for perhaps the first time to hear people talk about how they wanted to shape their identity a bit independently of the kinds of boarding schools and the much more schooling and regulation systems that earlier generations had grown up with. And yet, there are some moments when things look patently of an earlier era, right, where we've got, say, the chiefing out in North Carolina and that sort of thing. And so things look, at times, singularly unself-reflective. And so I'm wondering if, I tend to think that maybe we are all prone to this at some point in time, right? That there's going to be some place 50 years from now, people are going to look at us and say, oh my God, how'd you miss this, right? And so I guess one of the things that I'm kind of wondering about is if in the art field you find that you are sometimes pressured into making representations that are somewhat legible to the market. And if so, what sorts of structural things in that economic world do you imagine have to happen to make way for more of that kind of self-reflexivity in the work?
Question. Well, the work that I do in particular, I feel like there's we're kind of in an interesting point in history, and I'm sure every artist in every era has said that very same thing. But it seems like the market is asking Native people and artists individually what Native art is, rather than creating that space for you. But it's also, I mean, for my work, and I can only speak for myself, I like to play around with the actual stereotypical expectation, the checklist that would be Native art, and regurgitate that as like a tongue-in-cheek. The last series of work that I did was all based on Never Never Land and the Lost Boys and that whole story. So it was literally retranslating and appropriating a misconception and turning it into a commodity and selling it, as this is what you're looking for. And the nice thing is that I present that in an honest and sincere way, where I'm saying, this is that conversation, we've met here, like you drew the line, I shaded it. So, I don't know if that completely answers, but it's honest.
Hi, thank you very much for the film. I really enjoyed it. I was wondering if you could say something about your decision to fuzz out the expletives in some of the interviews. I mean, what I heard there might be a story about the intended circulation for the film. So maybe that's both a artistic question, but then also where have you been showing the film? What kind of groups have you been participating with it?
Because I funded this film in Kickstarter, this is your film. This film is absolutely free. And it's open for any sort of, you can display it in any way you want. It's called thisisastereotype.com, and this is our film. So you knew exactly what all of the expletives were. If you don't, then it didn't lose anything. We felt it was an adequate way to reach any audience and to create that sort of conversation. So if you are exposed, it wasn't covered up very well, you know. But if you are not exposed, we didn't divulge any secrets.
Hi. So as an aspiring photographer, I've always wanted to capture like this image of breaking a stereotype. And I was wondering, like, I don't know how old the voiceovers of the people were, but they sounded like on the older side, like in their college years and stuff like that. Did you ever think to use like high school students and what it meant to them about breaking the stereotypes and just like getting over being Native? And like, I don't know, I worded that weird, I'm sorry.
Yeah, good luck. Everyone who I interviewed were peers of mine. I don't hang out with many high school students, and that's the core of it, you know. The peers that I do hang out with are all around my age, and that's the only reason. It wasn't a choice. It was just what was available. That's a good and interesting point. There was a lot of the gaps between generations is phenomenal, and I'm constantly blown away by the effect of social media on the generations even below me, below that, you know, being born with internet, like millennial, wild. Nailed it.
I know
All
you
right.
guys have things to ask. Is there any more questions? We'd really love to have more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a question either. In fact, how you feel. You know what I'm saying? We can't get down to the core of this, and I'm really not going to have any answer.
Hello.
Hello.
So there was a quote in the movie, it was towards the end, where it was showing, I think it was Superman, and there was a voiceover saying that we've had a lot of activism where it was the really loud, in-your-face kind of activism, but we did them more by making them laugh. And so I just kind of wanted to hear your opinion of that, of what you think is the more effective form of Native American activism, if it's kind of the AIM style, really aggressive in your face, or if it's the way that it was mentioned in the film, like you'll maybe get an audience to listen better to your message if you can get them to laugh.
Good point. That is a good point. And a great question. And that's all I can say about that.
Hello. There were so many fantastic layers that involved identity in this. Something that was really poignant for me was when you talked about purity. And I'm just curious about if you can say more about that. It was just a point in the film, but it was something that I hadn't thought of in regards to those kind of layers of identity. So it's not really a question. It's very broad, but
No,
I'm curious about that, and
that's the
if there's
most
more.
important thing.
Okay.
What you just said right there. I'm curious about that. And that's as far as I can go into that. Like, that's the most important. Any answer you could get from that is secondary, but the question is more important than the answer is. And it's the only way that we're going to be able to get through any sort of identity issues is having those questions and not a pocket full of answers, you know? And this film isn't that. It's not the answer. It's not a answer. There's many contradictions in this film, but that is the complexity, you know? I don't know what purity is anymore in the world, except that I'm 100% pure.
Hi, so I noticed a lot of this footage seemed really dated in the sense that it seemed mostly in the 60s, 70s era. And I was wondering if there was any anxiety on your part of using footage that seemed to make it more dated, because there's a more push now to show American Indians in modern times interacting like on a day-to-day basis now. And so I was wondering, was there any anxiety on your part, or was like a choice to put it more in that era?
Yeah. Yes, it was. And yes, lots of anxiety. Always anxiety. The footage is from 1973, and I want to talk more about that footage because it was kind of integral for the making of this film. That footage was the first time in history that the program was funded by the BIA, and they gave first-generation VHS tapes to Native people to go back and film their communities, not an externalized version of your community. So there were many communities represented in that, so there were shift and contradiction, and what they focused on was different, but the thing that I loved about it was that most of it was mundane. Most of it was day-to-day life. And that is a conversation, like you said, now that we want to focus on. Like, look at what Native people are doing now. Look at how, you know, how we live. And the fact of the matter is that's been going on every single generation. And that conversation hasn't been had. And even the aspect that this video archive has done has gone nowhere. You know, once that stuff was, once all of the footage was taken, it went and sat in an archive, you know, and it was important, I felt, to utilize this footage to represent that even, you know, 40 years ago, there were normalcy. You know what I'm saying? There was, or that there was no romance. This was life, you know, and I felt like that particular conversation, I can't describe it. I wasn't even born yet. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't here for that conversation, but my parents were, and I grew up as a. I mean, it's interesting because in that period, I think about this talking to my mother, actually, who's also a Native artist. And she does the, you know, kind of like market-driven Native art. And I love her for it. And everybody who, in that era, who was doing that sort of work, are coming out of a generation of folks who were saying, if you could pass as non-Native, do it. You know what I'm saying? And don't, we need to hide our ceremonies, you know what I'm saying? And just like the cultural trauma was just a generation away. And during that civil rights period, that 1973, people were looking back to understand something that maybe their parents didn't teach them, that separation of elder, you know, knowledge was like cut off. And so then my parents' generation looked back to understand that more and ask questions and find the elders that would teach them. And in doing so, they also, the creation of that sort of romantic kind of period, dated period thing was empowering. You know, it was the first time that you could stand up and you could say, you know what, I am Indian. You know what I'm saying, and I'm proud of this. And look at where our people are from. Look at what we were like. Look at what we've done. And that I grew up knowing that. I have an absolute luxury that my parents went through that experience and reconnected to their cultural background in a way that the generation before them was still shell-shocked from denying it. So I grew up with that empowerment, and I take it for granted because that is life. You know what I'm saying? But in the process of going through that, you've got to recognize how important and how strong that was for that generation, and it's important for this current generation to recognize where we come from. That if we can touch the sky, it's because we're standing on the shoulders of so many people who have made sacrifice and who have done all of this work to allow us to have this conversation. You know, like even this scenario right here, right now, is miraculous.
I'm curious to know why in your first video it showed, like, I don't know if it was you or someone, they were just breaking a bunch of art. Was it you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I don't understand why. I mean, you say you still make this type of artwork, but I'm like, well, what really is like native art? I mean, if that's not really, if it's not true, and you're like, people just make it because it's what people want to buy. I mean, but you want people to know the truth to your culture. I don't understand why it's still done. I mean, to me, the little that I know, if you want people to be more educated on your culture and to not stereotype you, then why do you continue to give them what they want? That just hinders us, and it just makes us susceptible to the stereotype, to think, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's Indian. Or I think my little sister was an Indian 2 Halloweens ago because she thinks Pocahontas is pretty. I mean, but it's like, what are people doing to make it not, to erase that stereotype, to make, you know, you and I the same but different? I mean, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
No.
Am I not coming across? Okay.
No, I'm picking up what you're putting down, but I love the awkwardness in which you're delivering that. And I want to, let's see, I'll just, these are the pieces that I destroyed.
How do they not relate to your culture?
They, let me describe it.
Okay.
Okay, so each of these pieces are what are considered Native American. I don't know what Native American is, other than Asian, European. You know what I'm saying? It's a continental reference to so many different cultures. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So with these are the stereotypes for that umbrella, you know, for the term Native American, for a term that I use all the time, and disdain, so much disdain. I'm like, I'm Native American.
Yeah.
I'm Native American, you know, and but like, you know, technically, I'm Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, Lakota, Norwegian, Austrian. You know what I'm saying? Like, at some point, all of those people, all of those different nations are titling themselves as human beings. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you break down what that tribal name translates to English, it's like the people, the human beings. So it becomes this really kind of like strange redundancy, but it's the culture that's the question, you know? These pieces in particular are, they're all stereotypes. This one is called Big Chief. Big Chief is the hypersexualized, masculine, stoic, broad-chested native. You know what I'm saying? The wild, broad-chested Indian that will swoop you away, and his hair will fall on your face a little bit, and you'll sweat and you'll feign, and then you'll come back and you're like, well, at least I'm still in his arms. There's this huge feather, and it's a giant penis. You know what I'm saying? Like, just right in the front, on the surface. That is Big Chief. The next one over, I titled it Barrymore. Barrymore is a reference to Drew Barrymore, who had a Facebook profile picture, and she's throwing her peace sign, and it's Drew Barrymore, and you're like, E.T., and she's got on a war bonnet and a Budweiser apron. You know what I'm saying? War bonnets are they're from the people that I'm from, and I don't have the right to wear a war bonnet. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have that right. So it's more than a hat. You know what I'm saying? So so I'm building this chicken feather war bonnet that, like, illusion. You know what I'm saying? The feign. It's got the dream catcher that you can get in a gas station speaker covers. You know, that one's called the Barrymore. The next one over is the Indian Princess. Indian Princess. Wow. If you dress up for that for Halloween, where this reference comes from is settlers would come across and they would sleep with, maybe agreeably, maybe rape. Probably a lot of the times rape, and go back to their community and be like, oh, we saw you sleeping with one of those Indian women. You know what I'm saying? And he would say, yeah, but she was an Indian princess, to give her a sense of authority and something grander than what she is, and that's where that term comes from. That's where the first usage of Indian princess was normalized within the icon, you know what I'm saying? And now it's a Halloween costume.
I guess what I mean is...
Well, no, let me finish.
Oh.
So then the next one is the Curtis. And then that one is also, it's a reference to Curtis's photographs. And he would stage some of his photos because this was going to be sent back east. And if it wasn't quite Indian enough, like say you had a trade item clock, we're going to get rid of that clock because that's not Indian enough. Or here, I've got this trunk full of headdresses, you know, like please put this on, so that back east they can see that that's Indian enough, you know? So original person. The drunk, like we are not genetically more inclined to alcoholism. It's economic. The plastic shaman is the selling of spirituality or, you know, new aginess. The ghost, which is, I think, the most detrimental, which is there are no Native Americans. And then the Stefani, once again, Indian princess kind of thing. I built all of these because all of those stereotypes are ideas, and it's really difficult to get rid of an idea because it's ethereal. You know, it's vapor. And so I thought I could bind them to something that is more subject to entropy, these ceramic vessels. And this is why I broke them all. I wanted to show what the stereotypes are, represent that they are stereotypes, and then just let them go and let gravity break them. So that's where that comes from. But I understand what you're saying about the, you know, why do we make stereotypical native art? Like, I don't know if that's absolutely true. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think there's a lot that has to deal with the market and what the market's interested in, but it's also economics. You know what I'm saying? It's also a way to survive, and it's mother's milk. You know what I'm saying? It clothed me and dressed me, and that gave me the opportunity to have this conversation now. And I think now people are actually asking, what is native art? Asking native people what native art is, which is awesome. So thank you for doing that. Anything next? With all of that being said, this is called the Luger, and this is the piece that you guys have here at the museum. This also is a stereotype, and this, once again, basically deflates anything that I'm telling you tonight. I have no idea. You know what I'm saying? Everything that I've just said right now is also a complete stereotype. Like, how could I know, being this one person, you know, this single filter for 500+ nations with many different languages and many different cultures in which I, like me, just standing here is a complete taboo. You know, I'm a pariah in some situations. So this one's called the Luger, and it's named after me, which is saying if I'm going to point the finger at all of these different stereotypes, then anything that I say is also not 100% true. It's not. It's also a stereotype. And this is the only piece that survived. As if I wanted something that was going to last the ages, I wanted it to be that I too can do this, and that I do this, and that this whole conversation is based on the fact that I don't know, and it's complex, and it's bigger than any one individual. Any other statements? Questions? Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, it was a group effort. And really, like, I don't know if I have the rights for any of that footage, so this is why it's also free. I'm not making any money off of it. I put it together with Kickstarter, and that list goes on and on. I think it was like 8 handwritten pages of all of the donors that made this film possible. And I actually used Kickstarter as the primary aspect of this filmmaking, where I was like, who cares? Who wants to know about this? I'm going to put it out there, and there were enough people who wanted to have that conversation to fund the film, and so I felt obligated to do so with the help of Dylan McLaughlin and Ginger Dunhill, and we went through it, and this is why I say it's our film. So this is a stereotype.com. Play it for your friends, like if you want to have this conversation again, if you never want to see it again, if you want to share it with somebody, it's ours, it's free, it's on the internet. Any other questions? Thank you very much for allowing me to come here.
So I really appreciate you all for being here. I appreciate all the conversation that's taken place this evening. I want to invite you, if you have not seen some of the other exhibitions that we have up in the gallery, I'd like to invite you to visit Immortalis. We've just been notified that we are going to be, due to the visitation that we have and special circumstances, we're going to be able to extend that show into the early part of 2016, but it is the only stop that work will make in the United States, and I really encourage you to go and see the Roman busts in Immortalis. We still have distinguished visiting artist James Searle's exhibition up. That will be closing over the holiday. And Enter the Matrix, Indigenous Printmakers is up through the end of the year. And if you haven't seen that, I'd invite you to come and visit it. It has gained a lot of national recognition, and we're really honored to have people coming here to see contemporary Native American art. During our regular museum hours, admission is always free. We invite you to come back. We invite you to bring your friends and family. And I would like to invite you, if you have any questions for Cannupa that you'd like to discuss with him personally, he's actually stepped out into the gallery to stand with his work, and he is interested in having conversations out there in regards to the ceramic work separated from the film work. And he's stepped out, but I just really want to acknowledge Native American Studies, Film and Media Studies, Crossroads Film Festival again, and Cannupa Hanska Luger for coming here from New Mexico for this event this evening. Thank you all, and have a good evening.